Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you. And GoToMeeting's proving to be quite useful when you have a broken projector at the fire station. So you can see this is actually the Saratoga Fire Station, which we're bringing to you live. A great program here, and we're using this display as our display for the room. So before we get started, I'm going to show my good news. With Gary's help, Gary did about 3 of these presentations. We've been recording these web broadcasts and putting them on our YouTube channel. Let me see if I can expand this a bit. And we have 260 subscribers to our YouTube channel, and we have videos that get like 11,000 views here, 9,000 views. I mean, we're just really excited to have a lot of people being introduced to these nerdy topics that we talk about, and I think with Gary's help, we're kind of getting the West Coast to be able to see some of these talks, and we're just trying to build up the hobby. So we're just really appreciate all the help, and thank you, Gary, for all your support on this. It really helps on the video production to have you record these webinars, and then it's really pretty easy to post them. So
not a problem.
Without further. Okay, so we'll get into the talk. Okay, so how to build a DLG for under $200. In fact, let me just show it before we get into it too much. So I forgot the screws today, but this is the plane. We'll get so you can read it, and we'll talk about how the paint job was done, how it was built, how much it weighs, and the whole bit. And I think the other thing we'll talk about is the improvement over. This is the 2nd generation pickle. We call these pickles, and this looks like a Model T in comparison, but this is done about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's Kevlar, and so we've really improved it. And I owe a lot to the build group and our experts, so I'll get into who's helped and how we did this. But basically, we'll just cover how this whole thing was built. And also, I won't shy away from the bad news, which is the asterisk. And it's a great way to get a cheaper airplane, but basically, I had $400 of parts donated. I'll mention Tom, who was generous and donated a lot of these parts. And a lot of labor, and even at $15 an hour, which is perhaps minimum wage in some cities, it's a $2,200 investment of labor, and a ton of expertise was added to it too. So let's get into this product. They're all called pickles, and this is the one I just showed you, the first one, the Kevlar one. And Dominic was the brains of this one. The 1st generation pickle was called a atomic pickle thermal spud, and it was done by the East Bay DLG group, which had about 20 guys who were really involved with DLG, and a few of us kind of started to be interested in DLG from the South Bay Soaring Society. So we're like the old guys who do thermal duration, and then we had all these young hotshots on the East Bay who were building these planes and flying these really slick planes, which at the time I think were $2,000 or so. And Dom is quite a great modeler on the East Bay, and he built his own pickle, and we were just thrilled by that. So together we formed a build group, mostly with South Bay Soaring Society members, and Noel's here, and Ken's in the new building group, so he's here too. We formed a group, and before we built it, we obviously had to get a design, and like all great designs, we stole most of the great ideas, and with the internet, it's super easy to steal. So for starters, Mark Durrell, my personal hero, MIT professor, basically designed a lot of the archetypes that we use for our model airplane, for model sailplanes, for thermal duration. And then, funny enough, he also was the brains of the modern DLG, which was this pod and boom look and super light, and the way you put the wings on a pylon and the cross tail. A lot of that stuff was at least popularized or analyzed by Mark Dorella. And there's another guy, Gerald Taylor, who I don't have a picture of. He's called G_T on RCgroups, and he does airfoils, and he does terrific airfoils, and he even puts them into designs. The Synergy was a design that was helped build the 5th generation pickle, so we'll get into that. And the last thing is we're really inspired by a Japanese build group who built carbon fiber airplanes just with his incredible Japanese skills and craftsmanship. And they built planes that were so good that they, I think they won something like 2 out of the 10 world champion DLG flyers were built by this Japanese build group. So I'll mention them as well. But they were inspiration that, yeah, maybe you can build something that could be world class if you just put enough time into it. Oh, and speaking of time, when I was preparing for this talk, I realized, yeah, the first design is about 13 months before this picture, the final flight, first flight. So 13 months takes a little time. So I'll review some of these source designs. This, of course, is Mark Dorella, the guy we love and admire. And this is the Super G, which is really like the first time you kind of saw what a modern DLG looked like, at least as far as I know. And that's a Kevlar plane. You can tell when they're Kevlar because they have these golden wings, and it has a pod and boom and a graphite boom and a little graphite on the wing for a spar. And this is one of the Japanese builds. So the Japanese group built these 3 planes that at least the 3 I know about, Hayabusa, Haibu, and Black Magic. And like I said, these were built by an amateur group, but used in international competition. So it was quite inspirational. This was probably about 7 years ago that these guys were doing it. I haven't seen them since, and then the website is taken down, so it's pretty hard to track these guys down. And I'm not sure what they're up to now, but they were a big part of our inspiration. And here's our build group. That's Dom on the left, who continues to be the rock for our group. He has a garage that's dedicated to building models. Although this isn't the garage, funny enough, this is Philippe's garage, who's the Frenchman in the background. And Philippe is allergic to balsa wood dust. So we had to always build the first one, the 2nd generation pickle, in his garage. And this is Tom, who just was a charming, wonderful guy who joined our group and unfortunately passed away from brain cancer. But he donated a lot of these materials that we use for these planes, and he built like 2 or 3 of these 2nd generation pickles. He just loved this hobby. And I don't think I'll get into Greg. Greg was another person, but we'll talk about that. So that's the second generation pickle was done by our build group out of the South Bay Soaring Society. And after that, there continued to be a 3rd and 4th generation pickle. And the 3rd generation was called a skinny pickle. And this is a picture of it. And that was Greg Norsworthy who did that. And by the way, Greg has been basically the engineer of the group. Dom's the builder and the kind of pragmatic person who helps us decide what to do. Like we were just talking about what kind of foam to use. And I said, run it by Dom, because Dom knows what to use and what will curl and what happens what. But Greg is the guy who will tell you the formula for calculating the tail area and the fin. And he's the guy who was inspired to build the skinny pickle because he's a light guy. He's probably 130 pounds. And he flies competitively, and he needed a plane that he could toss all weekend long for a contest and not wear himself out. And he built the skinny pickle, which had a high aspect ratio. It was about 1 to 12 aspect ratio, and where most DLGs are like 10.5 or 1 to 10.5 or something. So it's quite skinny, but it was really not for everyone. It was just basically designed for Greg. And then another pickle came along, which is Noel's pickle, who's in the audience here. And I call it the broken pickle. I don't think Noel ever really liked that name, but I call it a broken pickle because we have funny names for the pickles. And it has a detachable wing. So the wing can actually, you can pull off one side of the wing and he can fit in this little Porsche. So it's a custom design just for Noel, and it flies terrific. So, so those were the 2 more generations. And so then we go on to the 5th generation pickle. For starters, I'd say what we needed a brain trust to do this, because I'm an okay builder, I'm an okay flyer, but I'm not, you know, I definitely, there's so much expertise that I just couldn't even compete with the brains that are out there. And so these are the guys that I drawed from quite a bit. And my whole build group. We have a new build group now, which is Katie and Ken and Dom and me. We're building this 5th generation pickle. So Greg Norsworthy has just been terrific. Unfortunately, he moved to Phoenix and now he's moved to Florida. So we can only communicate with him through email mostly, but he's still the engineer behind a lot of these designs. And like I said, he'll give me the formula for tail and fin area and stuff. And you know, we'll kind of say, okay, this is the right airfoil to steal or use, and what's the plan for him, what's the shape of the wing, and he's just been instrumental on that. And Dom, I mentioned Dom before. This is a picture of his garage, and this is where I show my contribution. I bring the beer to the build and some organizational skills, but Dom's in there working on this thing. He just loves building planes, and it's been just. If you drink enough beer, it'll take a long time. Well, no, we meet probably once every other week or once a week. It's like you almost need something to kind of meet and do it. And although Dom's focused, so he could build something in a week. Or Craig, how long did he take to build your broken pickle, Noel?
Oh gosh, it
was
4 months?
4 months, yeah. So Greg can crank, right? And how many days a week did you guys build?
Oh, that was 1 or 2 days a week, maybe.
Yeah. So 4 months if you do 1 or 2 days a week. So we do the slow path on this. Okay. Of course, my hero is Mark Dorella, and I gave a talk for this group about him, and that's the one with over 3,000 views on South Bay Soaring Society YouTube. So I want to give a plug for that. But Mark Dorella is just done terrific work. So we steal from him, and this is a Synergy, which is the plane that Gerald Taylor designed. I think he's a little mysterious, and I don't know a lot about him. I know he's on RCgroups, a very active member, and he publishes airfoils, just open source. And the airfoils for the Synergy were the ones we used on this fifth generation pickle. And his airfoils were also the ones we did on the 2nd generation pickle, which were called edge airfoils. And I guess we just call this the current just Synergy airfoils, but they're kind of almost have dates, so they keep evolving. And we grabbed these airfoils about 2012. So we're a little, that sounds like a little behind the curve, but we kind of like to see how they fly and see them, work on a couple planes, and we steal them at that point rather than the brand new ones. Like there's a Synergy 2 now, which we didn't quite catch, and we're happy to be a little conservative on that. Oh, and my son, this is Andrew. He's the designer, and I just had a goofy picture. We were doing haircuts, and he designed the font for the graphics, and then I wanted to do this kind of paint job, and at that point he said, "It's not my design anymore. The artiste does not like this," so he backed away. But I still think I owe Andrew a lot of credit for the cool paint job. So that's Andrew. So the way you design a plane is you first think of your goals. I mean, this is classic design, but it's funny that you don't, you think, oh yeah, we just grab a design off the internet, but no, you really tweak it and customize it for exactly what you want. And at the time, I was when I first started designing this plane, I kept getting beat in the East Bay DLG contests. No, I think you've done a few of those, right? And I don't know if you got clobbered, but I get clobbered every time. It's just ridiculous.
That was a clean.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think part of it was these guys had all slick planes, what's it, try to snipes and blasters and expensive planes and lots of talent. I mean, world class, literally guys who compete world
Yeah,
class.
their planes were all really slick and complete. And I was starting out with all Samimi.
It's a Tamimi, yeah.
It was
A Dutch plane, right?
barely stay up in the air. Bob McGowan could fly, but I sure couldn't. Go up and down.
Well, I was the same way. I was flying my second generation Pickle. And I think what was hurting me is that when I launched it, well, first of all, I'm a little older than most of these guys. And so I couldn't get a lot of height, just like the young guys could just wail on it. But also the Kevlar is a little more flexible. And so it wobble as it goes up. You can almost see the tail kind of do a little fish move. And every wobble loses altitude because it absorbs energy. So anyway, so the goal for me was to not be last place in these East Bay DLG contests. And the way a contest was run, it was like 1, 2, like 5 tasks, 1, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minutes, or some kind of combination. So they weren't like, they're modest in some ways. In fact, the irony is with a fancy plane, I've heard you're supposed to get 3 minutes on just a toss and gliding in complete dead air. But in my experience, you get like a minute. And but I wanted to get a 3 minute flight out of dead air. And also, like I mentioned, I wanted to launch higher. I was kind of, with my second generation, I can launch about 125 feet. And the studs can maybe almost hit 200. But I would be happy with a 150-foot flight or something, 20% increase, I think would help. And because of Tom's donation, we had some really cool spread toe fiber. So spread toe fiber is all these fibers going 0 degrees and the layer above, all the fibers going 90 degrees. And there's no weave in it. It's just 2 layers of fiber all, in parallel, except at 90-degree angles to each other. And the reason for that is it doesn't absorb as much resin. So, but the previous generation had the weave, what looks like about a 1/2-inch weave, and it had a really cool kind of pattern going, but that takes more resin to have those little creases in the fiber. So we have this really cool fiber from Tom, and so that was one of my goals, is to use that fiber. And lastly, the fuselage. In fact, I'll show that here. By the way, let me check in with the audience. Are you guys hearing all this okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so
Sounds good.
good. Okay, so this is a beat up fuse, but this is made from our mold that Greg basically made, and it feeds into a boom. And it's a nice nose. It takes a lot of beating. One thing about Kevlar is when it gets a crease like that, you can kind of blend some resin in there, and the even loose Kevlar becomes stiff. Becomes like real body work after you let it soak in and redo it. So it's great for if you're going to bash it a lot and do a lot of lawn darting. But Tom gave us these Wyoming Windwork fuselages, and you can see it's a uni piece. It's not just a boom. It's an actually elliptical shape, so it's a little wider on the horizontal axis and a little narrower, on that axis, and that makes it stiff as you launch, which is that's where the wobble comes, is that horizontal axis. Okay. So look at that, unplug it. Yeah. So it was really tempting not to build our own fuselages and just use these. So that was the goal, is to use parts. If you get free parts, you use them. In fact, we're gonna have our templates made outsourced, and we kept getting delays on trying to line those up, and so we ended up Dom built the templates himself. He printed them out. What was it, CompuFoil or something?
Yeah.
Was the program?
Yes.
Yeah, and then he put them on Formica and he just carved them up. That's an example of what Dom does. You talk about something, and then by the time you're done talking about it, Dom will have built it for you. So he's a pretty handy guy to have on a build group. Okay, so those were the goals. So then it was time for me to get out my Adobe Illustrator, which is a very unusual CAD program, but if you're kind of an artsy guy, it's your CAD program. So I'm using Adobe Illustrator. So the design was Greg was kind of the engineer on it, and he kind of said, the Skinny Pickle was a great plane, this third generation plane, but you probably don't need a Skinny Pickle. You're not 125 pounds, and you're not trying to launch it for a whole weekend. So let's fatten it up a little bit and get to an aspect ratio of about 1 to 11.4. So basically, we fattened up the Skinny Pickle to that, and then we picked the airfoils from Gerald Taylor, and unfortunately for the airfoil, it needed a 4-panel wing, which these guys are discovering as they're building their foam cores. When you build your foam cores, like our second generation, 2 panels was sort of took plenty of time. We screwed it up a lot, and 4 just kind of blows your mind. But you really get pretty good at it, and so it was remarkable how I think we had like 2 panels we had to throw away out of making 3 sets of, so 3 times 4 times 2 wings. So it's 4 panels on each side, but it was needed to make the airfoil work. So that was the plan for him. I kept iterating on this design, so it was worth getting on a sort of a CAD tool, you might say, so that we could all kind of discuss it and change it. In fact, you can see up here we moved the back bolt up forward because it became pretty obvious that if we put the bolt, this is where it was on the fuselage, standard Wyoming Windworks fuselage, and it was right where the hinge was. And in my experience, that means you can have a broken plane right there. So we've just moved it up, and so we can now see what's going on. This spar, I had a bent couple piece spar, and it's pretty obvious you need one straight spar. Why put a cut in it? That was ridiculous. So just looking at it, we helped us kind of think it through and work it out. The other advantage of not a skinny pickle, but it was early called a thin pickle because it wasn't skinny, but it was thin. But that wasn't funny enough, so we had to get a funnier name than that. Yeah, it became a burnt pickle because we had carbon, so it's all carbon, which is what happens when you burn a pickle. But when it was slightly fatter, we were able to put servos into the wing. The servos are pretty small now, but just a standard size servo, a thin servo, you can fit into this wing without doing anything funny. It still fits inside the skin, and you're not buying one of those really cheap servos or really funny servos. So it was like just a good compromise for the whole thing. And then of course we threw in 14 months to make sure it came out okay. So here's some more designs. These would take some time, but usually any planning work, you run into all these problems that you could think through and the parts you need, and so it was worthwhile. It's almost like you don't even need the picture when you're done, but just doing it you just get so much out of it. And this is some of my designs. I actually put the formula down, so there really is a formula for figuring these two out. And it's based on how long the boom is and how big the wingspan is. But it's not magic. It's not super complicated. And it's kind of fun to just play with the sizes, and you kind of know what the look is. You can just take a picture. What you do is you take a picture of somebody else's fin or stabilizer. You might hold up your iPhone next to it or something, so you get a scale reference, and you go, okay, I can copy that. And then the only variable is the area, things like that. Oh, and then you'll get to figure out how many spars you want to put in, and how do you sort that. And this is my, like I said, my son did the font and added the flames. And I think when I wanted to add a pickle, that's when he bowed out and said, "This is not art. I can't do this." He really didn't like the fade in and fade out we were doing on this. So I'll get in. I think I have a better picture to describe how I did that. And the little circles, my planes have these little circles on the wings. I read someplace that a geometric shape is easy to spot from a long distance. And it's true. If those two dots you can see almost at the very top of visibility, and it gives you a real sense of if it's upside down or upside up. So I'm kind of wedded to these circles. I also like to not paint too much, and so two black circles on my golden mylar or Kevlar wing is a pretty handy color, and two white circles on a carbon wing is pretty handy. Smiley face, yeah. You wouldn't be able to see the smiley face, so that we had to back off on that. So that's the design, and that does take a long time, and it's not really a build group function. It's more of a stealing time from experts, and you kind of send a question, wait for an answer, and you bring you climb the mountain and speak to the Dalai Lama, and then you bow, and then you come back to design it. But the Bay Area Build Group, and we're happy to have Ken join us now. But it's Katie, who's famous for being, I think, the only woman in South Bay Soaring Society. So she's been on both builds.
She's a second builder in South Bay Soaring Society.
Oh, there's no. Okay.
Nancy Lowe way back when.
Okay, great. And then Dom, you just say build and you can get Dom on your build group. So that's a good tip to know. We have an RC group thread. It sort of goes through the design, then goes blank for about 5 months, and then I have the finish, just starting to post it again. I kind of blame it on we were posting on a Bay RC for a while, and then Bay RC died, and it just really threw us for a loop because you had to have switch our posts and stuff. I mean, anyway, I've never quite gotten back into the build thread discipline, but I like to do build threads because it's kind of like your build manual. If you ever need to repair a part, or the next generation, you can say, how do we build that? And so it's worthwhile doing it, but it just takes just a little bit more discipline. It lacked for about 5 month period for me. Dom's garage, of course, was key. And Dom, I mentioned Dom creating the templates was super handy. So hot wiring, it's really a pretty simple process, but you can't throw away a lot of foam cores. In fact, I didn't mention with Noel in our first build group, we would build these foam cores, and then Noel was nice enough to say, I'll take the one that's not quite perfect. Remember that, Noel? So you're such a good guy.
Was built with all the rejects.
Yeah, that's right. So we used to say, we still say it. We said, oh, we made a part for Noel. So all these homely pieces come out, but we got pretty good at it, and it's set up with weights, so the hot wires pulled through foam core without touching it too much, and they came out pretty consistent. So the 4-panel wing wasn't as painful as it could be. I decided to take a daring step for me and put in a single cell battery, a LiPo single cell battery. I've always been a 2-cell kind of guy. And with 900 milliamps, which looks like a AA battery. And the thing goes, I've just timed it once, but it looks like it's gonna last 7 hours, which is pretty good for a DLG plane. If you fly it for 7 hours, you're like dead, or you spend a week doing it. So that's a little overkill, but I don't need the weight, so I'll probably leave it in there. the servos, we're using these Chinese servos. I thought I want to get fancy servos, but I've been hearing good news about these KST servos, and they seem rock solid right now. And I like the fact they were thin enough to use in the wings, but also I put them in the body as well. And I didn't like putting 4 servos in the body. It's really tough just to even work with 2 servos in the body, but 4 is just nuts in my experience. And we used a Spectrum receiver. I actually, you know, yeah, I guess these parts I'll mention these with video. Okay, so the receiver I used has these wires coming out of the body to get. You can just see the wires coming out. They're supposed to be at a 90-degree angle to each other, so they kind of stick out. They don't even have to do that because this is actually Kevlar. You wouldn't know it, but I painted it. I used a Sharpie. It made it black. So it just looks stupid, I think, a gold nose on these things. But anyway, that was the so I used a traditional carbon body receiver, even though I didn't really need to. But I didn't want to really be too dangerous on that. And I'm not going to break this apart, but the attachment between the wing and the body, we had these 4 wires sticking out, and I just knew that was going to get bent. So I think it was Don recommended getting the spring-loaded connector, so that now the wing is spring-loaded with 4 little buttons that kind of squeeze down. And it's from a company called Armsor in Hong Kong. But anyway, I put that in, and then during my flights, I'm going, God, the wing is sort of tilted. And I realized the spring loading was tilting the wing. I mean, you have to compromise and decide how many millimeters you want to bump it up. And anyway, it works fine when you put a bent credit card in the other side. So it's flying now. Okay, so back to this. Okay, so that was, and the other thing is I should have showed you this too, but I'm using a pull wire stab and fin control, and that's a beading wire. You know, the beading wire that little girls make little bracelets out of, and you just pull it, and then you make your own spring out of this really thin piano wire, and you build it. You make it kind of a shape of a stick man, just the lower body of a stick man. So 2 legs, 2 feet, 2 legs meet, and then you give it like a 45-degree twist or a 90-degree twist. And that spring, those 2 little feet, become the spring motion for the elevator and for the rudder. And that works well. I mean, when I was reluctant to do it, but I've done it now in 2 generations, and it's worked great. Greg Norsworthy says they used to use them on Supras, so they're used on big thermal duration, then they're fine for these super light planes. Okay, so here's the templates. Ken's going to get to know and love these. They're sitting over here on the table. They're very thin. You'll get to appreciate how thin they are. And if you build them and a part comes out, like if you hold it up to light and it's like too light, just put a little tape under one of them, and consistently just fatten them up a teeny bit. So, but these parts are really thin, and in fact, I had a bit of a problem in the stabilizer. Stabilizer was so thin that when I started to bend it, it started to delaminate because it, it's kind of stiff, and so I realized you have to Dremel out all the carbon on the Kevlar spring. We have a little strip of Kevlar in there for the hinge, and if you don't Dremel out a little strip of a kind of a ditch or gutter of no carbon, it's going to get too stiff and it's going to delaminate when it starts to bend. So, just a little tip for the future builders. And Stephen was asking about the paint job. So it's actually less tricky than it looks. So you make a stencil, and so the pickle with the pickle, and then you just spray it and you just let it mist off to nothing. So let's see. So so when I first put in the stencil, I painted the P and the I and C pretty thick, and let it fade off to nothing as you go to the right. And so that became just the pickle with a faded edge to it. And then I took the inside of the stencil and I pasted or stuck the Pickle and the pickle on the wing and then dusted it again. So it's like it's using the stencil twice. You use the cutout pieces of the stencil on the other side. And the other trick is I put a little white on the beginning just because the black would show through if you did kind of make a dusting of white on the really solid green parts. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So that's what a pickle looks like in the grass. Took lots of pictures before I flew it from experience. And here it is on Dom's driveway. It can get a little warm in the sun, and so some people, try to paint wings for that reason. But I think I've been told that when it's flying, I don't know, maybe Stephen told me. Somebody told me that when it flies, it stays cool, so you don't have to worry about that. It gets hot when it's flying.
Like the Canadians.
Oh, really? Did they get a warp or something?
No, they lost their wings.
Because of the heat.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
It's not the epoxy.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
At 150 miles an hour, the wings came off.
Okay.
This was the F3D in Sacramento.
Okay.
Another story.
Now we'll see what makes the wing come off first. It could be almost anything.
You won't be able to do what they do.
Yeah, but I made my own white bags out of garbage bags, so my theory is I'm gonna just cover them up when they sit around, and when it flies them. I know when it flies, I kind of feel it. It doesn't seem too hot. So, but I do notice if it sits in the sun, it's gonna get hot. But I think all the pickles are black now, so all the DLGs are black, so you kind of have to be careful. So this is the Maiden Flight, where Don helped me kind of trim it and fly it out and test it out. It still needs some trimming. In fact, this is kind of funny. There was a flight night at Portola Valley. We should have brought this up in our meeting. But Noel was there, Stephen was there.
We still have some meeting left.
Okay, yeah. We'll talk about it after this. And I brought both my pickles, and I was pretty nervous about flying the brand new one because it still wasn't, there's a lot of trimming to do, like especially when the flaps lower, well, first of all, the flaps aren't lowering enough, so I'm gonna have to probably add a little more control rod. In fact, you notice I haven't, still blue tape on the servo bays. Because I just don't want to lock it down yet. And it's a good thing I have, because I think I'm going to need about an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch more rod on the rods. The rods go through the wing. So through the wing and onto a glued in servo is almost impossible to adjust. So I'm going to make the adjustments before I do that. But anyway, so at flight night, I was flying it around, and it was kind of scary to be demoing a DLG that only had one previous flight, but I only hit one child, which was Stephen's son, so I think I was okay. And he's not really a child, so it was safe. But anyway.
He's never been the same since.
That's right. I should have hit the head or something.
So that's why he screams when we go down the pickle aisle at the dentist.
That's right. It's like shell shock. Okay. Oh, that's my last photo. So we'll go back. Okay, so now I can show you the parts we were talking about. So if you see these, you can see that a little better. That's where the aileron rod goes through the wing. This is the magic blue tape as the servo bay cover. But I'm glad I did that, because like I said, I'm gonna have to drop this quite a bit more during to land. It's funny, especially I noticed it when I was demoing it at the flight night, that if you don't have a controlled landing that goes pretty quick, you might run into people. So it's good to have flaps drop, and be aggressive about the landing. People have never seen me with that problem on my big plane, have you? The 100-inch plane with no spoilers. I usually come in on a contest pretty hot, and it can be dangerous. So let's open it up to questions. let's start with our audience. Guys, any questions? Oh, Dominic joined us. So Dominic, what mistakes did I make? He might not have a microphone.
This is John. I'll ask a question. How many did you build and how many do you intend to build?
Okay, so I'll repeat it for the audience. So that's John, who flies with us at Kennedy. By the way, if you're in the Bay Area and you like flying DLG, can I mention Kennedy? Kennedy Middle School on Sunday mornings, maybe 10-ish, 9:30-ish, 10-ish. Come on down, and we usually meet there. That's in Cupertino. So how many did we build? What we are building 3, and then now Ken's joined us, so we're going to build 4. But it's after about 14 months, it got a little. We decided we should get one built before before the plans become library archival material or something. So we pushed ahead and got mine built, and now I'm gonna try to keep the group going, but I'm feeling pretty lucky to have the first one. So there's 1 built and 3 in the works.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I'm a little late to the party. I apologize, but I'm curious about those very unique squared off wingtips. What's your thinking about those?
Oh, hi, John. We can see you now. I'm glad you're wearing clothes. Okay. It's called, you're just building away, and we didn't really think about doing anything but squaring them off. So I guess they're squared up. In fact, I didn't even mention this, but all the wings are really sharp right now, and so I'm gonna be kind of toning them down. I'll probably be filing this edge here, but I don't know if you can hear that, but it's carbon. It's pretty dangerous edge right now. So I'm going to use some blue foam, the kind of resin blue foam that you can make for fillers, and I'm going to be mixing it with some carbon powders to get it nice and black, and maybe micro balloons. And I'm going to just put a little bead on the leading edge and kind of sand it down, and I'll curve off the wings a little bit. But it's there's nothing magic about it. I don't think you can kind of go drive yourself nuts with aerodynamics, and I think at the end of the day there's probably a wobble in there, a waver in the airfoil or something. There's so many moving pieces that I doubt if there's a sharp edge or a rounded edge, it's going to really make a big difference.
Well, I just admire what you've got done so far. I have kind of similar aspirations, I would say, so I'm very glad to see what you guys are doing.
Oh, good. I know it's funny. I didn't mention that, but that's the joy of building, is you end up with a plane. It's like a B minus plane, B plus plane. If you're lucky, it's an A minus plane. But you just feel, a sense of ownership, and to me, it's half the hobby. It's flying and then it's building, so it's really rewarding.
Flying what you build. There's something unique about that.
That's right. Yeah.
Hey Kyle, this is Gary. Quick question for you. I think it's great what you've done, and one of the things I worry about in DLG especially is that the price of the admission fee to get in for someone who's new is pretty high, and building your own is a way of sort of avoiding that problem. Is there a way of making these easily manufactured or lower cost manufactured so that there can be newbies making these things? And then the second question is, have you thought about maybe selling them as a kit to recoup some of your expenses?
Those are great questions. Well, it's funny because for this talk, I thought I should look up what it costs to buy a blaster or a snipe, and they're like $620. So, that's pretty expensive. Yeah, Randy?
For Gary and for you.
Oh, let me answer the question before. Okay, so that was a kind of a shock. So $600. I mean, that if you at $15 an hour, that's like a couple build nights. So I would say, well, I would say the best way to get into the DLG is to get to know a group of people who do it, and then buy some of their old planes. I mean, they all have old planes. In fact, I forgot. I was going to bring in some of my old. I have some old DLGs. I have an old Taboo and I think parts of my old Predator, and I kind of try to clear them out once I get the next generation going. So I'm ready to give those up, and I know they're crappy planes compared to today's planes because they've been beat up so badly. I think my Predator actually tried to go through a cyclone fence and left the wings behind as the fuselage nosed through, and you can repair them and they still fly. But you know, you could get a pretty darn good plane, and you get sort of the knowledge of your friend who you buy it from on how to repair it and how to fly it. And that's a great inexpensive way to get going on it. And then, you know, I have to say, building it yourself is, unless your time's awfully free, it's be probably cheaper to buy it. So I don't know if that's the key.
It's the same argument. Don't figure out the price of the fish you haven't caught for dinner.
That's right. So fish, yeah, it's like that. So if you go fishing, yeah, you don't count the gas for the boat and the boat and the weekend. But you know, you love to fish, so you do that. So now you had another question. So how to get in inexpensively? Oh, and am I going to build it professionally?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm going to build 5 of these and do it in about 10 years, and I'll have like 5 production. No, we have a guy, Rick Spicer, in our group, and he used to be in the business of making planes. And I don't know, have you met anyone who makes money doing this? Oh, Randy.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Terry.
Okay.
And that is, I've seen planes now built using the 3D printing process, and they're starting to use fiber inside it.
A little hard to hear him, Kyle.
Yeah.
And
why don't you come around? He's talking about 3D printing. So he's probably right. There's some new technologies.
So there's some new technologies, especially out here in the there's some new technologies from some companies here locally that they have 3D printers that are able to use a variety of different metals and composites, that where you could actually, you know, design your DLG and then have it print sections of the wing, and then you can put it together, and it's very strong. I've seen these 3D planes flying on a YouTube video called Flight Test, and it's done very well. So we can keep the wing plan form, what we want, in very thin airfoil, and be at a lower cost and be able to produce these planes on a shorter time scale.
Okay, great. So, by the way, I'm going to mention something. I think I was on YouTube and I saw one of these 3D printer designs, and it was wild. I think they used a kind of a computer AI algorithm to come up with the design, and it was a bulkhead for like an Airbus, and it was so weird. The bulkhead wasn't just, you know, we're used to these systematic things like honeycomb and a sheet, you know, sandwiched together. This thing looked like, you know, the alien on the spacecraft decided to make these weird spidery shapes to maximize the strength of the design. So, you know, it could get pretty interesting. The one thing I've thought about is maybe using 3D printing or numerical control to build a mold. But even the mold, when I ask people like Rick Spicer, I mean, it's really hard to justify a mold for a small build. You need to get into a decent number. Otherwise, foam core seems to be the way to go to kind of make a one-off. No.
And I'd just like to add to the comment, to respond to the comment about somebody getting into the hobby and doing it and want to build a plane. My suggestion is that the Mimi by Franz Paul out of Holland makes the plan available at no cost. It's off the internet. And you'll send the file and you print it out at, was it Kinko's or whatever, some office supply place. And the wing is solid balsa. When you shape it, I built a couple of them, and shape the wing on a bell sander. You know, make the wing on
And they fly.
Saturday afternoon, and it goes up. The body is very, very simple, and it flies reasonably well. And it's repairable and quite inexpensive to build. So
Let me just check. Can you guys hear Noel? Okay.
Yeah, it's not easy, but we can.
Okay. So you're going up. Yeah.
Well,
So he's talking about the Mimi, which is an all balsa wood plane.
Mimi from France, Ball, out of the Netherlands.
France Ball.
France,
Yeah.
F-R-A-N-S.
F-A-R-A-N-S.
And
And Ball like the rubber.
B-A-L.
B-A-L from the Netherlands.
So if there's more interest in that, I'd be glad to post it or mention that somewhere. The other thing is that for somebody starting getting into this, the Whippet is a great plane for somebody to get to just try flying.
Yeah.
And for $200, you get a plane and a transmitter, and you're off and flying in a few hours.
Yeah. In fact, when you start talking, you forget the details. But at Kennedy, we're flying. Half of us are flying Whippets, which are these little foam planes. What's the wingspan? 18 inches maybe or something. And you just hand toss them. There's not even a peg. You just hand toss them. But that's an inexpensive way. Noel's saying about $200 all in with the transmitter and the plane and everything. And you don't break them, or you break them slowly. And it's a great way to kind of get into the hobby without spending a lot of money. A LaBelle, yeah. LaBelle's next step up. So, yeah. Any other questions? Oh, okay. Richard and then Steve.
Okay. We went over how you articulate the elevator and the rudder with the spring. And a spring.
Yeah.
I didn't quite visualize that. I'm sorry. Maybe everybody does that. I'm not sure.
It's an old DLG trick. So this is a string, and if I pull it, the rudder changes. See? So it's just a string. And the reason why it springs back is I have a little spring. And
it's built into the rudder.
yeah. So I'm going to draw it. It's going to be, I'll draw it big so you can see it. So that's the spring. I guess it's a thin wire like that. And I tuck it in right in the gap between, this would be like this is the rudder, and this is the fin out here. And then I put in two little, really thin aluminum pipes, and I stick the spring ends into that. So there's actually, it's not even glued in. So it's this shape kind of gives it some springing depth. And I built in a 90-degree twist into it.
I get it.
Yeah. So it springs back, and in wind, if you think about it, it's just in the wind, and if it spring back, if the wind pushes it a little bit, it's just a vein anyway, so it's going to keep resisting.
Oh, that's very small. That's like a paper clip. Right?
It's paper clip it's twice as light as a paper clip. It's really it's
another version of that too. Looks like two L's attached.
Yeah, I thought Stephen invented that. He showed it to me. It's brilliant. So yeah, the other way to do it is it's two L's like the head's touching, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks like that and that, but one's turned 90 degrees.
This is not the best head.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, he's talking about a. I'm drawing for myself. So yeah, so instead you could do, instead of this little leg, you have a leg coming up here. So it's really kind of safe. Twist is in here instead of yeah.
It's the same thing, just folded in half.
Yeah, you're right. It's instead of that shape, we just fold it back down. The cool thing about this one is the springs are exactly lined up.
So it doesn't.
So there's no torque. Yeah. So for a really light wing, a light thing, it's probably yeah. Okay, Stephen, question?
Yeah, how have you yet determined if this has met your design goals?
Does it fly?
What were your design goals?
Well, no, I mentioned them. It was to win one of those contests, not win the contest, but not be last. We need a really good
So
plane.
does it just come down to two things, launch height and glide path?
Yeah, and I think it's going to do it. It's not totally tuned in yet, and you know, I've only flown it 3 times now, and the first time was really just making sure the up was up and the down was down. So really twice, and one of those times was demonstrating it. The second time was at Portola Valley, but just Portola Valley. I mean, I was just giving a light little toss, and it was just going up like an arrow. I mean, just like on rails. And my old plane, like I said, it does this little fish thing as it goes up. And then when it was gliding, it was super smooth and just, you know, slicing the air. It was just amazing. I told somebody it was like an alien, some kind of alien probe or something. It was, you know, everyone else was flying these little drones and the little airplanes, and then all of a sudden I'm the weirdo with the glider, and I'm doing all. It seemed like a really good launch with just barely a toss. So I'm very happy so
far. Do you think we've reached the point now in DLG design that incremental improvements at this point can be so small that are there big improvements waiting out there to be discovered?
What? A biplane, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there always is. I mean, right? People would be blown away by this, and this is just a homemade plane now. You know, it keeps happening. I mean, like lithium batteries are unbelievable. I mean, like a 7-hour battery in a plane that weighs, this, by the way, the plane weighs 18.5 ounces with the battery. I'm sorry, 8.5 ounces. I keep messing up, but 10 ounces is what the old one was. This is 8.5 ounces, so that's a big improvement. I can't really, I could put a smaller battery in, but it's in the nose, so it's not going to help put balls, you know, to replace it. But you know, and then carbon is a new material, came out, so yeah, I'd say things keep getting better. And probably actually the place that's going to probably change the most is electronics and like stabilization and maybe what's called the telemetry stuff, like the rise and the fall and things. I used to think too, there might be a way to communicate between these things where you could find some lift and then all the other gliders could swarm around the thermal or something. You just, but electronics is usually the thing that changes the most. So. Okay, any other questions? All right, so thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us too. And thanks for Dom for being the godfather of this plane. So we really appreciate his help. Okay,
Thanks, Kyle.
thank you.
Thanks for sharing.